Marcus Chun had seen enough death to know when it was coming for him. The alien holding the plasma rifle to his head was evidence enough. The creature's 4 arms moved with practiced efficiency, 2 keeping the weapon steady while the other 2 secured his restraints. Its chitinous exoskeleton gleamed under the harsh lights of what he assumed was an interrogation chamber. 3 days ago, Marcus had been a simple cargo hauler running supplies between Earth's outer colonies. Now he sat bound to a metal chair, surrounded by the most feared predators in known space, the HFY Collective. Their reputation preceded them across every civilized world. They were conquerors, slavers, and worse. Entire star systems had fallen silent after their black ships appeared on the horizon. The door hissed open with a sound like escaping steam. Marcus looked up to see a figure that made his blood run cold. The newcomer stood nearly 8 feet tall, its elongated skull crowned with bone ridges that caught the light like polished ivory. This was clearly a leader among the HFY. Its eyes, 6 of them arranged in perfect symmetry, fixed on Marcus with an intelligence that was somehow more terrifying than simple animal hunger. Human, the creature spoke, its voice a harmony of clicking consonants and whistling vowels that the universal translator in Marcus's ear converted into cold, precise words. "You are Marcus Chun, registered cargo pilot, license number 779-Alpha Kilo." It wasn't a question. Marcus said nothing, though his mind raced. How did they know so much about him? His capture had been random, hadn't it? He'd been running a routine supply drop to Mining Station Kepler when the HFY raiders had appeared from nowhere. His ship, the Lucky Strike, had been outgunned and overwhelmed in seconds. The tall alien circled his chair with deliberate slowness. "Your species puzzles us, Marcus Chun. We have conquered 17 star systems. We have enslaved 43 different species. All of them begged. All of them broke. All of them showed us proper fear when they understood their situation." Marcus tried to keep his breathing steady. He'd heard the stories. The HFY didn't just kill their enemies. They studied them first. They learned everything about a species before deciding whether they were worth keeping as slaves or simply wiping out entirely. Earth was next on their list, according to intelligence reports that had reached the outer colonies just before the communications blackout. But humans, the alien continued, stopping directly in front of Marcus's chair. "Humans are different. Do you know what your people have done in the 3 months since we began our campaign against your worlds?" Despite himself, Marcus found his voice. "Fought back." The creature's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "Fought back. Yes. But more than that." It gestured to one of its subordinates, who activated a holographic display that filled the air between them. Images flashed before Marcus's eyes. HFY ships burning in space. Alien ground troops retreating from human settlements. Most shocking of all, human civilians, not soldiers, standing over defeated HFY warriors with improvised weapons. "Your military resists, as expected," the tall alien said. "But your civilians, your farmers, your merchants, your children, they fight with a ferocity we have never encountered. A HFY warrior undergoes 20 years of training before seeing combat. Your people learn to kill us in 20 minutes." Marcus stared at the images. He recognized some of the locations: Proxima Base, New Tokyo, the agricultural domes of Ceres. These weren't military installations. These were the places where ordinary people lived and worked. "We captured this footage from our own surveillance drones," the alien explained. "Watch closely." The hologram zoomed in on a particular scene. A group of HFY soldiers had cornered a human family in what looked like a farming community. The humans appeared helpless: an older man, a woman, and 2 children. But as Marcus watched, the man suddenly threw a handful of something into the faces of the nearest HFY. The aliens recoiled, clawing at their eyes. In that moment of distraction, the woman produced a modified mining laser and began cutting down the confused attackers. "Capsaicin powder," the tall alien said with something that sounded almost like respect. "Your people call it pepper spray. Harmless to humans, but it blinds our species for several minutes. We had no prior knowledge of this weakness." The humans discovered it accidentally and spread the information across their entire population within days. More images flashed by. Humans using sound frequencies that disrupted Vex-High communication implants. Humans rigging simple household chemicals into explosives that could penetrate Vex-High armor. Humans training their domestic animals to attack alien scent markers. But this is not why you are here, the alien said, waving the hologram away. Marcus noticed that the creature's 6 eyes never seemed to blink in unison. It was deeply unsettling. We brought you here because of what happened on Kepler Station, the alien continued. Tell me, Marcus Chun, what do you remember about the final moments of your capture? Marcus thought back to 3 days ago. The Lucky Strike had been crippled by the first volley from the Vex-High Raiders. His engines were dead, life support was failing, and his communication array had been fried. He'd been preparing for the end when something impossible had happened. The station defended itself. Marcus said slowly, "The mining platform opened fire on your ships." Indeed, a civilian mining operation with no military weapons, no trained soldiers, no defenses beyond basic asteroid deflection systems. Yet they damaged 3 of our cruisers and destroyed 1 completely before we overwhelmed them. The alien's mandibles clicked again. Would you like to see the tactical analysis of that engagement? Without waiting for an answer, the creature activated another holographic display. This time, Marcus found himself looking at a 3-dimensional battlefield map. Red dots represented Vex-High ships, blue dots showed the mining station and his own vessel. We approached Kepler Station with standard intimidation protocols, the alien explained. 5 heavy cruisers, 47 fighter craft, enough firepower to reduce a small moon to asteroid fragments. The mining platform should have surrendered immediately. The display showed the Vex-High formation moving in on the station like wolves circling wounded prey. Marcus could see his own ship, the Lucky Strike, drifting helplessly between them. Instead, observe what occurred. The blue dot representing Kepler Station suddenly erupted in activity. Smaller dots began streaming away from it, moving in seemingly random directions. But, as Marcus watched, he realized there was a pattern. The dots were positioning themselves between the Vex-High ships and the station. Mining pods, Marcus breathed. They launched every mining pod they had. 67 industrial mining craft, the alien confirmed. Each one piloted by a civilian miner with no combat training. They used their drilling equipment as weapons and their explosive charges as missiles. They turned their construction mechs into improvised tanks. The tactical display continued its deadly ballet. The mining pods swarmed the Vex-High formation like angry insects. Red dots began winking out as the aliens found themselves under attack from every direction. We lost 17 fighter craft in the first 60 seconds, the tall alien said. Not to military weapons, but to mining lasers and industrial plasma torches. The humans modified their equipment in real time, turning tools into weapons with an efficiency that bordered on the supernatural. Marcus watched in amazement as the battle unfolded. He remembered seeing explosions outside his cockpit viewport, but he'd been too focused on trying to restart his engines to fully understand what was happening around him. But the most remarkable moment, the alien continued, came when your ship was in danger. The display zoomed in on the Lucky Strike. Marcus could see 2 Vex-High fighters closing in on his position, their weapons charging for a kill shot. Then, impossibly, one of the mining pods interposed itself between the aliens and his ship. Miner designation, Iron Duke, piloted by a human named Sarah Martinez, the alien said. Age 43, mother of 2 children, 15 years of experience operating heavy machinery. She had no military training, no combat experience, no reason to risk her life for a stranger. Marcus remembered now. He'd seen the mining pod explode as it absorbed the full fury of the alien weapons. The sacrifice had bought him just enough time for the station's emergency teams to reach him. Why did she do it? The alien asked. By all rational calculation, saving your ship served no strategic purpose. You were already disabled. Your cargo was unimportant. Your survival would not have altered the outcome of the battle. Yet this human threw away her life to protect you. Why? Marcus met the creature's six-eyed gaze. Because that's what humans do. We protect each other. Even strangers? Especially strangers. The tall alien was silent for a long moment. When it spoke again, there was something different in its voice. Something that might have been uncertainty. We have conquered 43 species, it said. All of them had survival instincts. All of them understood the value of self-preservation. Some even showed courage in the face of death. But none of them ever willingly sacrificed themselves for others without hope of genetic or tribal advantage. You humans do this regularly, consistently, without apparent logic. More images appeared in the holographic display. Human soldiers throwing themselves on grenades to save their comrades. Civilian rescue workers risking their lives to pull strangers from burning buildings. Parents sacrificing themselves to ensure their children's escape. It is tactically unsound, the aliens said. It defies evolutionary logic. It serves no rational purpose. And yet it makes your species extraordinarily dangerous. Marcus thought he was beginning to understand. You can't predict us. Precisely. We model the behavior of every species we encounter. We calculate their likely responses to pressure, their breaking points, their surrender conditions. With humans, every model fails. You act contrary to self-interest so frequently that it appears to be your default state. The alien moved closer to Marcus's chair. Tell me, Marcus Chun, if I offer to spare your life in exchange for information about Earth's defenses, what would you say? Marcus didn't hesitate. I'd tell you to go to hell. Even knowing that your refusal will result in torture, pain beyond anything you can imagine, an eventual death that will serve no purpose. Especially then, the creature's mandibles clicked rapidly. And this is why we fear you. Not your technology, which is adequate but not exceptional. Not your military, which is brave but not uniquely so. We fear your irrationality. Your willingness to choose pain over surrender, death over cooperation, sacrifice over survival. The alien turned away from Marcus and began pacing around the chamber. Do you know what happens when an unpredictable variable enters a complex system? Marcus Chen. Marcus said nothing, but he sensed this was important. The entire system becomes unstable. Everything we think we know, every calculation we have made, every strategy we have developed, all of it becomes unreliable. Your species has introduced chaos into our perfectly ordered conquest. Images of destroyed Vex-High installations filled the holographic display. Marcus was shocked to see how much damage humanity had apparently inflicted in such a short time. 3 months ago, we controlled 17 star systems with absolute certainty. The alien continued. Today, we are losing territory daily. Human resistance cells operate behind our lines. Human civilians refuse to be enslaved. Human prisoners escape at impossible rates. And human tactics defy every principle of conventional warfare. The alien stopped pacing and fixed all 6 eyes on Marcus again. Your people don't fight to win, Marcus Chun. You fight to make us lose. There is a difference, and it is profound. More footage played before Marcus's eyes. Human guerrilla fighters didn't try to capture Vex-High positions. They simply made them too expensive to hold. Human saboteurs didn't target military assets. They attacked infrastructure that the aliens needed to maintain their occupation. Human civilians didn't resist out of hope for victory. They resisted out of simple spite. We are an ancient species, the tall alien said. We have been conquering worlds since before your people learned to make fire. We understand warfare, diplomacy, conquest, and control. But we do not understand spite. We do not understand a species that would rather burn than bow. Marcus felt a strange sense of pride welling up in his chest. Maybe that's why you'll lose. The alien's 6 eyes narrowed. Perhaps. Or perhaps there is another way. Something in the creature's tone made Marcus tense. What do you mean? That is why you are here, Marcus Chun. Not as a prisoner. Not as a victim. You are here because the Chief War Commander wishes to speak with you. Marcus felt his blood turn cold. He'd heard whispers about the Chief War Commander of the HFY Collective. It was said to be a creature older than entire civilizations, a being that had orchestrated the conquest of entire galaxies. The Chief has observed the human anomaly with great interest, the tall alien continued. It has decided that traditional conquest strategies will not succeed against your species. Therefore, it seeks to understand you, to learn from you, to find a path forward that does not require the complete annihilation of humanity. Marcus stared at the alien in disbelief. You want to surrender? The creature's mandibles clicked in what was definitely amusement this time. Hardly. But the chief has concluded that this conflict serves no one's interests. Humans resist too effectively to be enslaved. You spread your defensive innovations too quickly to be contained. And you influence other species to resist more effectively than they ever did alone. More images flashed by other alien species that had apparently begun adopting human resistance tactics. The cancer of human-style warfare was spreading throughout the galaxy. The chief will offer you a choice, the tall alien said. Not surrender. The chief knows humans do not surrender. But perhaps accommodation. Coexistence. A way forward that allows both species to survive. Marcus tried to process this information. After everything he'd heard about the HFY, after all the destruction they'd caused, they were actually considering peace? Why me, he asked. I'm nobody special, just a cargo pilot. The alien's 6 eyes seemed to focus on him with new intensity. That is precisely why you were chosen. You are not a military leader who might see advantage in deception. You are not a diplomat who might craft words to hide true meanings. You are an ordinary human, and it is ordinary humans who have proven most dangerous to us. The creature moved to a control panel and began manipulating alien controls. The chief will see you now, Marcus-chan. Remember, you go not as a prisoner, but as a representative of your species. What you say and do in the next hour may determine whether humanity survives the coming years. As the chamber door opened and guards moved to escort Marcus deeper into the alien ship, he wondered if Sarah Martinez and all the others who had died protecting strangers had known they were fighting for something bigger than individual survival. Maybe humans weren't irrational at all. Maybe they understood something the rest of the galaxy had forgotten. Maybe sometimes the most logical thing you could do was something completely illogical. The corridor ahead stretched into darkness, leading toward a meeting that would change everything. The corridor seemed to stretch forever. Marcus walked between 2 HFY guards, their chitinous feet clicking against the metal flooring in perfect synchronization. The walls were lined with bioluminescent strips that pulsed with a sickly green light, and the air carried scents that Marcus couldn't identify, something like ozone mixed with decay. As they walked deeper into the ship, Marcus noticed details that spoke of a civilization far older than humanity. The walls weren't just metal. They were grown, organic composites that seemed to breathe with the ship's systems. Occasionally, he glimpsed other areas through transparent sections. Vast chambers filled with cocoon-like structures. Laboratories where alien scientists worked on specimens Marcus hoped weren't human. Armories containing weapons that hurt to look at directly. The HFY ship was enormous. Marcus had thought Earth's largest dreadnoughts were impressive, but this vessel made them look like children's toys. It was less a warship and more a mobile city, complete with manufacturing facilities, research centers, and what appeared to be entire ecosystems contained within specialized biodomes. How many people live on this thing? Marcus asked one of his escorts. The alien's head swiveled toward him, its compound eyes reflecting the corridor lights. This is not a ship, as you understand the concept. This is Nexus Prime, the mobile command structure of the HFY Collective. Population: approximately 400,000 beings across 700 distinct species. Marcus stumbled slightly. 700 species? The Collective does not simply conquer. We integrate. Each species that joins us brings unique capabilities. The Thekron provide biotechnology. The Maze AI contribute quantum computing capabilities. The Sylvanth offers psionic communication networks. Every member species finds their place in the greater whole. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. The Vexi weren't just conquerors. They were builders of a galactic empire that spanned hundreds of worlds and countless civilizations. Humanity wasn't fighting a simple alien invasion. They were fighting the most successful collaborative civilization in known space. Where do humans fit in that equation? Marcus asked. The guard was silent for several steps. When it finally answered, there was something odd in its translated voice. That is what the Chief War Commander seeks to determine. They passed through several security checkpoints, each one more elaborate than the last. Marcus submitted to biological scans that tingled against his skin, chemical analysis that required him to breathe into strange devices, and what he suspected were psychological evaluations conducted by machines that read his brain patterns directly. At each checkpoint, the guards were different. The basic Vexi escorts gave way to larger, more heavily armed variants. Then came aliens Marcus didn't recognize, tall, graceful beings with crystalline skin, floating creatures that seemed to be made of organized energy, arthropod-like entities that moved in perfect formation. All members of the collective, his original escort, explained when Marcus asked. Each checkpoint is staffed by specialists best suited to detect threats from different classes of beings. The Luminae sense electromagnetic anomalies. The Void Etch detect quantum fluctuations. The Segmentali analyze behavioral patterns. Marcus realized he was walking through the most sophisticated security system ever conceived. Whatever the Chief War Commander was, it was protected by technology from hundreds of different civilizations. Has anyone ever tried to assassinate the Chief? Marcus asked. Many have tried. All have failed. Not because the Chief is particularly well defended, but because those who meet the Chief rarely wish to cause harm afterward. There is something ominous about that statement, but before Marcus could ask for clarification, they arrived at their destination. The doors before them were massive, easily 50 feet tall, and carved from what appeared to be a single piece of black crystal. Symbols were etched into the surface, glowing with inner light that shifted and moved like living things. Marcus couldn't read them, but somehow he understood their meaning. Here dwells the one who speaks for all. Remember, his escort said as the great doors began to open, you represent your species in this moment. The Chief sees not just Marcus Chun, but all of humanity through your eyes. The chamber beyond was nothing like Marcus had expected. Instead of an alien throne room or high-tech command center, he found himself in what could only be described as a garden. The space was vast and circular, with a domed ceiling that showed a real-time view of the stars beyond. Plants from dozens of worlds grew in carefully maintained ecosystems, creating a riot of colors and textures that was almost overwhelming. The air was clean and fresh, filled with the sounds of running water and what might have been alien birdsong. Pathways wound between the various gardens, leading toward the center of the chamber where a simple clearing waited. In the center of that clearing sat the Chief War Commander. Marcus had prepared himself for many possibilities. A massive creature like something from Earth's prehistoric nightmares, an ethereal being of pure energy, a horrific fusion of organic and mechanical components. What he found was far more unsettling than any monster. The Chief War Commander looked almost human. It was tall and slender, with pale skin and silver hair that seemed to move in a breeze Marcus couldn't feel. Its face was ageless. It could have been 30 or 3,000 years old. Only its eyes marked it as clearly alien. They were large and completely black, like pools of dark water that seemed to reflect depths that had no bottom. Marcus Chun, the chief said, and its voice was soft, musical, and utterly without emotion. Please sit. A chair had appeared, or perhaps had always been there, and Marcus simply hadn't noticed it. He sat cautiously, acutely aware that he was in the presence of something far beyond his understanding. You are confused by my appearance, the chief observed. You expected something more monstrous. Marcus found his voice. I expected something more alien. The chief smiled, and the expression was somehow more disturbing than any snarl would have been. I'm the oldest member of the collective, Marcus Chun. I have guided the expansion of our civilization for longer than your species has had written language. In that time, I have learned that communication is most effective when conducted between similar forms. The creature gestured, and its appearance shifted like water. For a moment, Marcus found himself facing a perfect replica of a HFY warrior, complete with chitinous armor and forearms. Then the image flowed again, becoming something that might have been made of living crystal. Another shift brought a form of pure energy barely contained within a humanoid outline. I can appear as any species within the collective, the chief explained, settling back into its human-like form. I choose this shape because it allows us to speak as equals, without the psychological barriers that difference creates. Marcus swallowed hard. What are you really? I am what becomes necessary, the chief replied. I am the mind that thinks in centuries, the will that acts across star systems, the voice that speaks for unity where there was once only chaos. I am what your species might become, given time and wisdom. The implication sent chills down Marcus's spine. You're saying you were once human? Not human, no. But I was once like you, young, passionate, convinced that my way was the only way. My species achieved great things and made terrible mistakes. We learned, eventually, that survival requires adaptation. Evolution. Growth beyond the limitations of individual perspective. The chief gestured toward the gardens surrounding them. Each plant here represents a different world, a different species that has joined the collective. Some came willingly, seeking the benefits of cooperation. Others resisted and had to be persuaded. But all found their place in the greater ecosystem. Marcus looked around the chamber with new eyes. What he had taken for a beautiful garden was actually a memorial, or perhaps a zoo. Each section represented an entire civilization that had been absorbed into the HFY collective. Where would humans fit in this garden? Marcus asked. That is what we are here to determine, the chief replied. Your species presents unique challenges. The alien leader stood and began walking among the planted sections. Marcus followed, noting how each ecosystem was perfectly maintained but somehow lifeless, beautiful, but static. The Thekron were brilliant biotechnicians, the chief explained, stopping beside a section filled with luminescent fungi. They created wonders that transformed entire worlds. But they lacked vision beyond their immediate needs. We provided them with purpose, direction, goals worthy of their capabilities. They moved to another section, this one dominated by crystalline formations that sang in harmonious tones. The Lumine AI were pure mathematicians, capable of calculations that boggled lesser minds. But they were paralyzed by infinite possibility. We gave them focus, specific problems to solve, a place in a greater equation. The pattern continued as they walked. Species after species, each with remarkable abilities, each lacking something the collective provided. Marcus began to understand the true scope of what he was facing. The HFY weren't conquerors in the traditional sense. They were collectors, gathering up civilizations like a gardener collects flowers. What do humans lack that you can provide? Marcus asked. The chief stopped walking and turned those black, bottomless eyes toward him. That is the question, isn't it? Because from our observations, humans seem to lack nothing. You're not the strongest species we have encountered, nor the smartest, nor the most technologically advanced. But you possess something we have never seen before, which is the ability to refuse improvement. Marcus frowned. I don't understand. The chief gestured to a control panel that emerged from the floor at its touch. Holographic displays filled the air around them, showing scenes of conflict from across the galaxy. Every species we have encountered has had goals, the chief explained. Survival, expansion, knowledge, power, comfort, security. When we demonstrate that membership in the collective will better serve those goals, they eventually accept. It may take years or even decades, but rational beings always choose the option that best serves their interests. The displays showed various alien species in different stages of integration into the collective. Marcus could see the progression: initial resistance, gradual accommodation, eventual cooperation, and, finally, complete integration. But humans, the chief continued, appear to have no rational goals whatsoever. New images appeared, scenes from the current war between humanity and the collective. Marcus watched human forces making decisions that made no tactical sense. Civilians choosing death over surrender. Entire colonies self-destructing rather than submitting to conquest. We offered the humans on Proxima Base complete autonomy in exchange for cooperation, the chief said. They would have retained their government, their culture, their way of life. They would have simply acknowledged collective authority and provided tribute. The arrangement would have benefited everyone involved. Marcus watched footage of the Proxima Base incident. He remembered hearing about it on the news, an entire colony that had chosen to fight to the death rather than surrender. Instead, they chose extinction. Not just the military, but civilians. Not just adults, but children. They had a choice between life with minor restrictions or death with complete freedom, and they chose death. The chief's voice carried a note of genuine puzzlement. We have modeled this decision from every possible angle. There is no rational explanation for their choice. They gain nothing through resistance except the certainty of their own destruction. Marcus thought about Sarah Martinez, the miner who had died to save his ship. He thought about the defenders of Proxima Base. He thought about every human who had chosen the hard path over the easy one. Maybe that's the point, Marcus said quietly. Elaborate. Marcus struggled to put his thoughts into words. Maybe the choice itself is what matters. Maybe being able to say no is more important than the consequences of saying it. The chief was silent for a long moment. When it spoke, its voice was carefully neutral. You are suggesting that humans value the freedom to make choices more than the outcomes of those choices. I'm saying maybe some things are worth more than survival. Such as, Marcus looked around the garden of conquered civilizations. Each one was perfectly preserved, perfectly maintained, and perfectly dead. The right to be wrong, the right to fail, the right to choose badly, and live with the consequences. The chief moved closer to Marcus, its black eyes seeming to look through him rather than at him. And if that choice leads to the extinction of your entire species, then at least it's our choice. The alien leader was quiet for so long that Marcus began to wonder if he had said something wrong. Finally, the chief spoke, and for the first time, there was something like emotion in its voice. Do you understand what you have just told me, Marcus-chun? Marcus shook his head. You have just explained why the collective cannot integrate humanity through traditional means. You have also explained why we cannot simply destroy you. I don't follow. The chief gestured, and the holographic displays changed to show star charts spanning the galaxy. Red areas marked collective territory, while blue zones indicated free space. Marcus was shocked to see how much of the galaxy was still unconquered. The collective has been expanding for millennia, the chief explained. But our growth has slowed dramatically in recent centuries. Do you know why? Marcus studied the charts. The red zones seemed to be fragmented, with corridors of blue cutting through them like cracks in a wall. You're not growing anymore. You're actually losing territory. Precisely. And do you know what changed? Marcus looked at the timeline displayed along the edge of the star chart. The slowdown had begun about 1,000 years ago, long before humans had developed space travel. Something learned from you, he said with sudden understanding. Another species figured out how to resist effectively. Several species, actually. Each one learned from the others. Each one taught their neighbors. The galaxy is developing an immune system, Marcus-chun, and humanity appears to be the most virulent strain of resistance we have yet encountered. The implications hit Marcus like a hammer. You're not just worried about conquering Earth. You're worried that what happened to us will spread to everyone else. The chief nodded slowly. Human resistance tactics, are already being adopted by 17 other species. Human-style guerrilla warfare has appeared in sectors where no human has ever traveled. The concept of choosing death over submission is spreading like a virus through populations that had never conceived of such a thing. Marcus felt a surge of pride mixed with terror. Humanity wasn't just fighting for itself, it was fighting for the freedom of the entire galaxy. "So what do you want from me?" Marcus asked. Marcus stared at the Chief War Commander in stunned silence. The most powerful being in the galaxy was asking for his help. A simple cargo pilot who 3 days ago had been worried about meeting his delivery deadlines. "You want my help?" Marcus finally managed. "I'm nobody. I don't speak for humanity. I can't make deals or negotiate treaties." The chief walked to a section of the garden where Earth-like plants grew in carefully maintained rows. Marcus recognized tomatoes, wheat, and what might have been apple trees. The sight of familiar vegetation in this alien place was somehow more unsettling than comforting. "That is precisely why your help is valuable," the chief said, touching one of the tomato plants with something that might have been reverence. Diplomats speak in careful words designed to hide true intentions. Military leaders think in terms of advantage and victory, but you think like an ordinary human. And it is ordinary humans who have proven most dangerous to us. The chief turned back to Marcus, its black eyes reflecting the artificial starlight from above. "Tell me, Marcus-chun, what do you know about the collective's expansion into the spiral sector?" Marcus shook his head. "I've never heard of it. It happened 3,000 years ago. The spiral sector contained 47 star systems and 18 different species. We approached them with standard integration protocols. Most species accepted membership voluntarily once they understood the benefits. 3 required military persuasion. The integration took 47 years and was considered a complete success." The chief gestured, and holographic displays materialized around them. Marcus found himself looking at star charts, population statistics, and what appeared to be efficiency ratings for different worlds. Within 50 years of integration, technological advancement in the spiral sector had increased by 400%. Poverty was eliminated. Disease was nearly eradicated. Interspecies conflict ended completely. By every measurable standard, the beings living in the spiral sector were better off as members of the collective than they had been as independent species. Marcus studied the displays. The numbers were impressive: longer lifespans, higher standards of living, access to technologies that would have taken the individual species centuries to develop on their own. "Sounds like paradise," Marcus said carefully. By most definitions, it was. Crime became virtually unknown because citizens had access to everything they needed. War ended because resource conflicts no longer existed. Scientific advancement accelerated because researchers could draw on the combined knowledge of hundreds of species. The chief paused, and something subtle changed in its expression. "Would you like to know what the population of the spiral sector is today?" Marcus had a feeling he wasn't going to like the answer. "Tell me." 0. The holographic displays shifted to show empty star systems. Dead worlds orbiting silent suns. Space stations drifting without power or purpose. What happened to them? The chief was quiet for a long moment, its alien features unreadable. They stopped reproducing. Not all at once, and not for any reason we could identify. Birth rates simply began declining across all 18 species. Slowly at first, then more rapidly. Within 300 years, entire civilizations had simply faded away. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. They died of comfort. They died of purpose, the chief corrected. Or rather, the lack of it. When all your needs are met, when all your problems are solved, when every question has an answer, and every challenge has been overcome, what reason is there to continue? The alien leader moved through the garden, stopping at different sections that Marcus now realized might represent dead civilizations rather than living ones. "It has happened 12 times in the collective's history," the chief continued. "Always the species that achieved perfect integration. The Kethmori were master builders who could construct wonders that lasted millennia. Under collective guidance, they built cities that were marvels of engineering. Then, they stopped building anything at all. The Yurvash were explorers who had mapped half their galaxy before joining us. We gave them access to complete star charts and unlimited travel capabilities. They never left their home system again. Marcus was beginning to understand the scope of the problem. You're not just conquerors. You're the end of growth, the end of struggle. We are the end of need, the chief said. And apparently, many species require need to survive. They require challenges, conflicts, problems to solve. Take those away, and they lose the will to continue. But some species don't die out, Marcus observed. The Vexi are still around. So are others. The Vexi are different. We were the founders of the collective. We created this system because it served our needs, the need to organize, to control, to bring order to chaos. The challenge of managing a galactic civilization is what keeps us alive. The chief gestured to other sections of the garden. The Thekron survive because we constantly give them new biological challenges to solve. The Maze AI endure because we provide them with increasingly complex calculations to perform. Each surviving species has found a way to maintain purpose within the collective structure. Marcus thought he was beginning to see where this was going. And you think humans might be the same way? No, the chief said, and its voice carried a weight that made Marcus's bones ache. I think humans are something entirely different, something we have never encountered before. New holographic displays appeared, showing footage from the current war. Marcus watched human resistance fighters engaging Vexi forces in battles that made no tactical sense. Humans throwing themselves into hopeless fights. Humans sacrificing themselves for strangers. Humans choosing the hardest possible path in every situation. Most species fight to achieve something, the chief explained. Victory, survival, protection of their young, acquisition of resources. They have goals, and they use warfare as a tool to achieve those goals. When the cost becomes too high or the goals become impossible, they surrender. Marcus watched footage of human forces that had clearly lost continuing to fight anyway. Not strategic retreats or last stands designed to buy time. Just pure, stubborn refusal to quit. Humans fight for the sake of fighting. The chief continued. You resist for the sake of resistance. You struggle not because you believe you can win, but because the struggle itself has value. This is unprecedented. Maybe that's because we're too stupid to know when we're beaten, Marcus said. The chief's black eyes fixed on him with startling intensity. Or perhaps you understand something the rest of us have forgotten. The alien leader waved its hand, and the garden around them dissolved. Marcus found himself standing in what appeared to be an observation deck, with walls of transparent aluminum showing the vast expanse of space beyond. In the distance, he could see other ships, dozens of them, ranging from sleek Vexi cruisers to vessels of designs he didn't recognize. What do you see, Marcus-chun? Marcus looked out at the fleet. It was impressive, enough firepower to reduce entire star systems to cosmic dust. I see the most powerful military force in the galaxy. Look closer. Marcus studied the ships more carefully. Something was bothering him about their formations, but it took him a moment to identify what it was. They're all following the same patterns. Same spacing, same orientations, same everything. The collective values efficiency above all else, the chief explained. Every ship follows optimal protocols. Every crew performs optimal procedures. Every decision is made according to optimal parameters. Optimal according to who? According to our combined calculations. We have been perfecting these systems for millennia. Every battle we fight teaches us new optimal strategies. Every engagement generates data that improves our protocols. Marcus continued to study the fleet formation. The more he looked at it, the more it bothered him. It's too perfect, too predictable. Explain. Marcus struggled to put his thoughts into words. If I were going to attack this fleet, I'd know exactly what it was going to do. Every ship would respond according to its optimal protocols. I could predict your movements better than you could. The chief was silent for a long moment. And how would humans arrange their fleet? Marcus thought about the military vessels he'd seen during his cargo runs. Human fleet formations never looked like anything in the tactical manuals. They were messy, inconsistent, and often seemingly random. Badly, Marcus admitted. Human commanders argue with each other. They disobey orders. They try stupid stunts that get people killed. Half the time, human fleets look like they're about to attack each other instead of the enemy. And yet human fleets have inflicted significant casualties on collective forces. Marcus thought about that. Maybe that's because you can't predict crazy. The chief moved to a control panel and began manipulating holographic displays. Star charts appeared, showing the current positions of human and collective forces throughout the galaxy. Observe the pattern of human resistance, the chief said. The star charts highlighted recent battles, with red indicators showing collective victories and blue showing human successes. Marcus was surprised to see how many blue indicators there were. From the news reports he'd heard before his capture, he'd thought humanity was losing badly. But the tactical display told a different story. Human forces lose approximately 60% of direct engagements, the chief explained. By military standards, this represents a catastrophic failure rate. Any rational species would have surrendered months ago. Marcus studied the data more closely. But you're not winning territory. Precisely. Human defeat in battle does not translate to human surrender of territory. You lose a fight, then simply continue fighting somewhere else. You abandon positions that become untenable, then attack positions you should not be able to threaten. You operate according to no tactical doctrine we can identify. Maybe that's the point, Marcus said. Maybe not having a doctrine is our doctrine. The chief turned those unsettling black eyes toward him again. Elaborate on that concept. Marcus tried to think through what he'd observed about human behavior during his years as a cargo pilot. Humans don't like being told what to do, even when it's the right thing to do. We'd rather make our own mistakes than follow someone else's correct answer, even if your mistakes lead to death. Especially then, at least there are deaths. The chief manipulated the controls again, and the display changed to show individual battles in greater detail. Marcus found himself watching tactical analyses of human engagements with collective forces. In this battle, the chief said, highlighting one particular engagement, human forces had achieved a clear tactical advantage. They had superior positioning, adequate firepower, and multiple escape routes available. Standard military doctrine would have dictated a systematic advance to consolidate the advantage. Marcus watched the battle unfold. The human forces had indeed held the advantage initially. Instead, observe what occurred. The human ships suddenly scattered in all directions, abandoning their advantageous position to pursue individual attacks on different targets. The formation dissolved into chaos as each captain seemed to choose their own priorities. They threw away their advantage, Marcus said, and in doing so, achieved something far more valuable, the chief replied. The collective forces had prepared for a standard engagement. They were positioned to counter a systematic advance. They were not prepared for 12 different simultaneous attacks from unexpected directions. Marcus watched as the scattered human forces created confusion throughout the collective formation. Ships that should have been able to support each other found themselves isolated and dealing with separate threats. Collective vessels began responding according to their individual threat protocols, the chief continued. But since each ship was facing a different situation, their responses were no longer coordinated. The human chaos infected our order. The battle's conclusion was devastating for the collective forces. What should have been a manageable engagement became a rout. This pattern repeats constantly in engagements with human forces, the chief said. You sacrifice tactical advantages to create strategic chaos. You lose individual battles to win larger objectives. You operate according to principles that defy military logic. Marcus was beginning to understand something important. You think in terms of systems. Humans think in terms of, I don't know what to call it. Individuals, maybe? Explain. Marcus struggled to articulate something he'd never really thought about before. Your ships all work together because they're all part of the same system, like cells in a body. But human ships work together because each captain chooses to work together. They could choose not to, and sometimes they do. The chief was very still, as if processing something significant. You are suggesting that human cooperation is voluntary rather than systematic? I'm saying human cooperation is unreliable. But maybe that's also what makes it unpredictable. The alien leader moved back to the transparent walls, gazing out at its perfectly organized fleet. The collective succeeded because we eliminated the inefficiencies of individual choice. We created systems that functioned optimally regardless of personal preferences or individual failings. Marcus joined the chief at the observation window. And now you're facing an enemy that runs entirely on personal preferences and individual failings. Yes, and that enemy is teaching other species that systematic efficiency can be defeated by individual chaos. Marcus thought about the implications of that statement. You're not just worried about humans spreading resistance tactics. You're worried about humans spreading the idea of individual choice. The chief turned toward Marcus, and for the first time since their conversation began, it showed clear emotion. What Marcus saw in those black alien eyes was something that might have been fear. If every member species of the collective suddenly decided that individual choice was more valuable than systematic efficiency, the chief said quietly, the collective would cease to exist within a generation. Marcus felt the weight of that statement settle over him like a physical presence. He wasn't just representing humanity in this conversation. He was potentially determining the future of every species in the galaxy. So what do you want me to do about it? Marcus asked. The chief war commander looked out at its fleet, at its empire, at everything it had spent millennia building, and gave Marcus an answer that changed everything he thought he knew about the war. I want you to teach me how to choose, it said. Marcus stared at the chief war commander, certain he had misheard. You want me to teach you how to choose? The alien leader remained silent for a long moment, its black eyes fixed on the fleet formations outside. When it finally spoke, its voice carried a weight that seemed to span centuries. I have not made a true choice in over 4,000 years, the chief said. Every decision I make is based on optimal calculations, predictive models, and systematic analysis. I determine the most efficient path forward, and I follow it. This is how the collective functions. This is how I have always functioned. Marcus struggled to process this information. But you're the leader. You give orders. You make decisions all the time. I execute optimal protocols, the chief corrected. I analyze data and implement the most efficient solutions. But choice requires the possibility of making the wrong decision, of acting against logical self-interest, of valuing something abstract over something concrete. The chief gestured toward the transparent wall where its fleet waited in perfect formation. Those ships are positioned according to optimal defensive parameters. Every vessel occupies the precise location that maximizes our collective capabilities while minimizing our vulnerabilities. It is the most efficient possible arrangement. Marcus studied the formation. Even to his untrained eye, it looked impressive, a geometric pattern of ships that created overlapping fields of fire and mutual support. But the chief continued. It is also completely predictable. Any enemy with sufficient analytical capability could determine our optimal responses to any given threat. They would know where we would move, how we would react, what tactics we would employ. That's what I was thinking earlier, Marcus said. Perfect efficiency makes you predictable. Precisely. And predictability, we are learning, is a fatal weakness when facing an unpredictable opponent. The chief moved to the control panel again, bringing up new displays. This time, Marcus saw recordings of human fleet formations, if they could even be called formations. The human ships seemed scattered almost randomly, with no apparent pattern or coordination. Human fleet arrangements appear chaotic, the chief observed. There is no optimal spacing, no systematic positioning, no logical defensive structure. By every measure we understand, human fleets should be catastrophically vulnerable to coordinated attack. Marcus watched the footage of human ships moving in what looked like complete disarray. Some vessels flew in tight clusters, others spread out across vast distances. Some moved in straight lines, while others followed seemingly random paths. But human unpredictability creates a problem we have never encountered, the chief continued. We cannot calculate optimal responses to suboptimal positioning. Our tactical protocols assume that enemy formations serve some logical purpose. When they serve no logical purpose, our responses become inappropriate. The display showed a battle where collective forces had engaged a human fleet. The Vexi ships had moved to counter what their analysis suggested was the human formation's weak point, only to discover that the humans had no formation at all. The scattered human vessels had simply continued their random movements, turning the carefully planned collective attack into a confused melee. We won that engagement, the chief said, but it required 3 times longer than our models predicted and cost us twice as many ships as should have been necessary. A Pyrrhic victory against what should have been an inferior opponent. Marcus was beginning to understand the scope of the problem facing the collective. You're too good at what you do. Your efficiency is making you inefficient. An accurate assessment. We have optimized ourselves to the point where we can no longer adapt to the non-optimal. We have become so systematic that we cannot respond to the non-systematic. The chief turned away from the displays and began walking through a section of the garden that Marcus hadn't noticed before. This area was different from the others. The plants here seemed to be growing wild, without the careful maintenance visible elsewhere. This section represents something new, the chief explained. An experiment, if you will. These are earth plants grown without collective optimization protocols. No systematic spacing, no engineered soil conditions, no calculated nutrient delivery. Marcus looked at the wild growth around them. It was messy, inconsistent, and somehow more alive than the perfectly maintained sections they had passed through earlier. What's the point of the experiment? To observe what happens when growth occurs without optimization. To see if chaos produces something that order cannot. They walked through the wild section in silence. Marcus noticed that while the plants here were less uniform than those in the other sections, they seemed more vigorous somehow. Some had grown larger than their carefully tended counterparts, while others had developed in unexpected directions. The results have been instructive, the chief said. Plants grown without optimization exhibit behaviors we did not expect. They adapt to local conditions in ways our models did not predict. They develop resistances to diseases that our optimized specimens cannot survive. They create their own ecological niches rather than simply filling predetermined roles. Marcus stopped walking. You're not just talking about plants, are you? The chief's black eyes met his. No, I am not. They emerged from the wild section into a clearing where several benches had been placed around a small pond. The chief gestured for Marcus to sit, then settled across from him with movements that were too graceful to be entirely human. The collective has encountered a problem that optimization cannot solve, the chief said. We are facing an enemy that grows stronger through chaos rather than weaker. Our attempts to bring order to the conflict only increase human resistance. Our systematic approach to conquest has become a liability. Marcus thought about the implications of what he was hearing. So you want to learn how to be chaotic? I want to learn how to choose poorly, the chief corrected. How to make decisions that are not optimal. How to act against logical self-interest. How to embrace inefficiency for strategic advantage. That doesn't make sense. Precisely. It makes no sense, which is why I cannot do it. My entire existence has been devoted to making sense. I cannot simply decide to abandon logic. Marcus leaned back on the bench, trying to wrap his mind around the conversation. The most powerful being in the galaxy was asking him to teach it how to be irrational. Why me? Marcus asked. I'm not a teacher. I'm not even particularly good at being irrational. You are human, the chief replied simply. Your species excels at irrationality. You make poor decisions regularly and somehow benefit from them. You sacrifice advantage for principle, efficiency for independence, safety for freedom. And you think those are good things? The chief was quiet for a long moment. I think they are human things. And human things appear to be more effective than collective things in the current conflict. Marcus thought about his life as a cargo pilot. Most of his decisions had been made for simple, practical reasons: which routes paid best, which cargoes were safest to carry, which stations had the best repair facilities. He'd never thought of himself as particularly irrational. "I don't even know where to start," Marcus said. "How do you teach someone to make bad decisions?" "Perhaps we should begin with a simple exercise," the chief suggested. "I will present you with a choice, and you will explain your decision-making process." The chief gestured, and a holographic display appeared between them. Marcus found himself looking at a tactical scenario: two fleets facing each other across empty space. "This is a hypothetical engagement," the chief explained. "The red fleet represents collective forces. The blue fleet represents human forces. You are the human commander. What are your orders?" Marcus studied the display. The human fleet was clearly outgunned and outmaneuvered. The collective forces had superior positioning and more powerful weapons. From any rational perspective, the humans should retreat immediately. "Withdraw," Marcus said. "Get out of there before you're completely destroyed." The chief's expression was unreadable. "That is the optimal choice. It preserves your forces for future engagement and avoids unnecessary casualties. It is the logical decision." "Right. So what's the problem?" "Observe what human commanders actually did in similar situations." The display changed to show real battle footage. In scenario after scenario, human commanders faced with impossible odds did exactly the opposite of what Marcus had suggested. They attacked. They charged directly into superior enemy forces. They threw themselves into hopeless battles with apparent enthusiasm. "This is irrational behavior," the chief said. "It achieves no tactical advantage. It results in heavy casualties and serves no strategic purpose." Marcus watched the footage more closely. While the human forces were indeed taking heavy casualties, something else was happening. The seemingly suicidal attacks were creating chaos in the collective formations. Ships that should have been coordinating their fire were instead responding to individual threats. The systematic precision of the collective forces was breaking down. "Maybe it's not about winning the battle," Marcus said slowly. "Maybe it's about making you fight the battle wrong." "Explain." Marcus pointed to the display. "Your ships are designed to work together as a system. But when humans attack in seemingly random ways, your ships have to respond individually. That breaks down your systematic advantages." The chief studied the footage with new attention. "You are suggesting that human irrationality is designed to force collective forces into equally irrational responses." "I'm suggesting that sometimes the best way to fight a system is to refuse to be part of the system." The alien leader was quiet for several minutes, processing this information. When it spoke again, its voice carried a note of something that might have been excitement. "This represents a completely different approach to conflict," the chief said. "Rather than seeking to optimize their own capabilities, humans seek to de-optimize their opponent's capabilities." Marcus nodded. "Sort of like, if you can't beat them, make sure they can't beat you either. A mutually destructive strategy. Logically unsound, but effective against an enemy that relies on logic." The chief stood up and began pacing around the small pond. "This changes everything. If human irrationality is actually a form of anti-logical warfare, then our attempts to respond logically only increase its effectiveness." Marcus was beginning to see where this might be heading. "You want to learn to be illogical so you can fight humans more effectively?" The chief stopped pacing and looked directly at Marcus. "No, I want to learn to be illogical so I can understand what we might become if we stop fighting humans at all." That statement hung in the air between them like a challenge. Marcus realized that they had moved far beyond the original question of human resistance to something much larger. "You're talking about changing the entire collective," Marcus said. I am considering whether the collective can survive contact with human ideas without fundamental transformation. The chief gestured toward the wild section of the garden. Those plants growing without optimization. They're more resilient than our carefully maintained specimens. They adapt better to change. They survive conditions that kill our perfect examples. But they're also messy, less efficient, less predictable. Yes, but they're alive in ways that our optimized specimens are not. Marcus thought about the civilizations that had faded away after joining the collective. Species that had achieved everything they could want and then simply stopped wanting anything at all. You think the collective is dying, Marcus said. Not from outside attack, but from inside. From too much perfection. I think the collective has achieved exactly what it set out to achieve, the chief replied. And I'm beginning to suspect that what we achieved was a form of death. A perfect, efficient, systematic death. The alien leader moved to the edge of the pond and stared down at its reflection in the water. Humans represent something we had not considered possible. A species that chooses growth over safety, struggle over comfort, chaos over order. And you want to try being like that? Marcus felt the weight of those words settle over him like a physical presence. The chief war commander of the Vexhai Collective, a being that had conquered entire galaxies through systematic efficiency, was choosing to trust him completely. It was either the most hopeful thing he had ever heard, or the most terrifying. What exactly does that mean? Marcus asked carefully. The chief stood from the bench and walked to the center of the clearing. It means I'm going to do something that my advisors will consider insane. Something that violates every protocol in the collective's operational matrix. Something that could destroy everything we have built over the past 5 millennia. And what's that? I'm going to stop the war. Marcus blinked. Just like that. Just like that. Unilaterally. Without negotiation. Without terms. Without guarantees of reciprocity. I will order all collective forces to cease offensive operations against human targets immediately. The implications hit Marcus like a hammer. Your own people will think you've lost your mind. They will be correct. By every standard the collective understands, this decision is clinically insane. It abandons strategic advantage, ignores tactical considerations, and serves no logical purpose. Marcus stood up, his mind racing. But you're doing it anyway? I'm choosing to do it anyway. That is what you taught me. That the choice itself has value independent of its consequences. The chief gestured, and the space around them began to change. The garden dissolved, replaced by what appeared to be a massive command center. Holographic displays filled the air, showing real-time. Marcus could see the positions of collective and human forces, ongoing battles, supply lines, and strategic objectives. Observe, the chief said. This is the current state of the war. Marcus studied the displays with growing amazement. The scope of the conflict was staggering. Thousands of engagements across hundreds of star systems. Billions of beings on both sides locked in a struggle that showed no sign of ending. According to our projections, the chief continued, this war will continue for approximately 47 more years. Human resistance will gradually weaken as their industrial capacity is degraded, but they will never surrender completely. The final human strongholds will require direct assault at enormous cost. New projections appeared, showing casualty estimates that made Marcus's stomach turn. The numbers were so large they became abstractions, entire species reduced to statistical probabilities. The collective will achieve victory, but at the cost of becoming something different than what we are now. The constant warfare will militarize our society beyond recognition. The need to suppress human-inspired resistance movements will require increasingly authoritarian measures. We will win, but what we become in the process of winning will not be worth preserving. Marcus absorbed this information slowly. And if you stop the war? Unknown. That is what makes it a choice rather than a calculation. The chief moved to a control panel and began manipulating the displays. New scenarios appeared, projections based on an immediate ceasefire. Our analysts have identified 17 possible outcomes, the chief explained. In 12 of them, The cessation of hostilities leads to the eventual dissolution of the collective as member species adopt human-style independence movements. In 3 scenarios, humanity uses the respite to develop weapons capable of destroying us completely. In 2 scenarios, both civilizations survive, but remain permanently antagonistic. What about the 17th scenario? The chief paused, its black eyes meeting Marcus's gaze. In the 17th scenario, something unprecedented occurs. Both civilizations change. Both adapt. Both become something neither was before. Marcus studied the projections more carefully. The 17th scenario was marked with probability estimates, so low they barely registered on the displays. The odds of that happening are almost zero, Marcus observed. 0.003% to be precise, the chief confirmed. Completely negligible from a statistical standpoint. So why consider it all? The chief's expression changed, becoming something that was unmistakably a human smile. Because it is the only scenario where both of us get to find out what comes next. Marcus felt something shift in his understanding of the situation. The chief wasn't just talking about ending the war. It was talking about choosing an unknowable future over a predictable one. You're gambling everything on a 0.003% chance, Marcus said. Yes. And do you know why I'm capable of making such a decision now, when I could not have made a week ago? Marcus thought he was beginning to understand. Because you learned it from humans. Because I learned it from you, specifically. Sarah Martinez, the miner who died to save your ship, had even worse odds of success. Her sacrifice had perhaps a 1% chance of meaningfully affecting the outcome of the battle. Yet she chose to act anyway. The chief gestured, and Marcus saw a replay of the moment from the Kepler station battle. Sarah Martinez's mining pod interposing itself between his ship and the Vex-High fighters, buying him just enough time to be rescued. That choice made no logical sense, the chief continued. But it changed everything. Not just for you, not just for that battle, but for this entire conversation. If she had not made that irrational choice, you would not be here. I would not have learned what I needed to learn. This moment would not exist. Marcus felt a profound sense of connection to a woman he had never met but who had saved his life. Her choice had rippled across space and time to create possibilities that no calculation could have predicted. So, what happens now? Marcus asked. The chief moved to the central control console and placed its hands on interfaces that began glowing with alien symbols. Now I make my first truly irrational decision. I order the cessation of all collective military operations against human targets, effective immediately. Just like that. Just like that. The chief's fingers moved across the control interfaces with practiced efficiency. Across the galaxy, Marcus realized military orders were being transmitted to collective forces. Ships that had been preparing to attack human positions were being told to stand down. Ground forces engaged in active combat were being ordered to withdraw. The entire war machine of the most powerful civilization in known space was grinding to a halt. My advisors are already requesting emergency conferences, the chief said, indicating displays that were lighting up with incoming communications. The War Council will demand explanations. The various species representatives will insist on review sessions. The strategic planning committees will require detailed analysis of this decision. What will you tell them? The truth. That I have learned something new about the nature of choice, and I am choosing to embrace uncertainty rather than continue pursuing a predictable victory. Marcus watched in fascination as the tactical displays updated in real time. Red indicators showing collective attacks were winking out across the galaxy. Human forces, apparently as surprised as everyone else, were slowly responding to the unexpected cessation of hostilities. What if they don't stop fighting? Marcus asked. What if human forces keep attacking? Then I will have learned something important about the difference between choice and reaction, the chief replied, and I will respond accordingly. You mean you'll restart the war? The chief paused in its manipulations of the control systems. I mean, I will choose what to do next based on what actually happens, rather than what I calculate should happen. That is what choice means, remaining open to possibilities you cannot predict. The command center around them was becoming increasingly busy as collective officers and advisors materialized via holographic projection. Marcus could see the confusion and concern on alien faces as they tried to understand why their supreme commander had just made such a dramatic decision without consultation. "They're scared," Marcus observed. "Yes, they have become accustomed to systematic decision-making. The concept of choice without calculation is as alien to them as their original forms were to you." The chief finished its input at the control console and turned to face the growing crowd of holographic advisors. "I will need to spend considerable time explaining my decision to the collective leadership. But before I do that, I have a question for you." Marcus felt a familiar chill of apprehension. "What kind of question? Would you be willing to serve as an ambassador between our species?" Marcus almost laughed. "I'm a cargo pilot. I don't know anything about diplomacy. Precisely why you would be perfect for the role. Diplomats are trained to achieve specific objectives through calculated negotiation. But we help us discover what becomes possible when very different civilizations choose cooperation over conquest." Marcus looked around the command center at the alien technologies and impossible scope of the collective's operations. Then he thought about Sarah Martinez and her impossible choice about the defenders of Proxima Base and their refusal to surrender about every human who had chosen the hard path over the easy one. "I'd have to get back to Earth first," Marcus said. "Explain what happened here. Let people know that the war is over." "The war is paused," the chief corrected. "What comes next depends on choices that have not yet been made." Marcus thought about his ship, the Lucky Strike. "I would not have it any other way." The holographic advisors were becoming increasingly agitated, demanding attention and explanations. The chief raised a hand, and the command center fell silent. "Marcus Chun," the chief announced to the assembled crowd, "cargo pilot license number 77-Alpha Kilo, has just agreed to help us learn what becomes possible when two incompatible civilizations choose to trust each other." One of the advisors, a Vexi with elaborate cranial ridges, stepped forward. "Chief War Commander, with respect, this human has no diplomatic credentials, no negotiation training, no relevant experience in interspecies relations." The chief looked at Marcus and winked, an unmistakably human gesture that was somehow perfect coming from the ancient alien leader. "Exactly," the chief said, "which is why he might actually succeed where experts would fail." 3 days ago, Marcus Chun had been a simple cargo pilot worried about meeting his delivery deadlines. Now he was standing in the command center of the most powerful military force in the galaxy, having just helped convince its leader to make the most irrational decision in the history of interstellar warfare. As he looked around the room at alien faces, showing mixtures of confusion, concern, and cautious hope, Marcus realized that Sarah Martinez had been right to make her impossible choice. Sometimes the most important thing you could do was act without knowing what the consequences might be. Sometimes the only way forward was to choose the unknown. The war between humanity and the collective was over, but something far more interesting was just beginning. For the first time in galactic history, two completely incompatible civilizations were going to try to figure out how to coexist as equals rather than conqueror and conquered. It was going to be messy. It was going to be unpredictable. It was going to be completely irrational. In other words, it was going to be perfectly human. Marcus looked at the chief war commander, who was already beginning to field questions from its bewildered advisors, and smiled. Whatever came next, at least it was going to be interesting. The human thought he was their next victim, but what the chief asked of him had changed his fate forever. Now he would help change the fate of two civilizations, one impossible choice at a time. The chief looked up at Marcus, and for the first time since their conversation began, something like hope flickered in those black alien eyes. "I want to try choosing," it said, "even if I choose wrong. Especially if I choose wrong." Marcus realized that the war between humanity and the collective had just taken a turn that no one could have predicted. The question was no longer whether humans could resist the collective's expansion. The question was whether the collective could survive learning what it meant to be human. "So what's your first choice?" Marcus asked. The chief war commander smiled, and the expression was genuinely human despite the alien features. "I choose to trust you," it said, completely and irrationally, against all logic and all evidence. "And we will see what happens next." The chief war commander looked directly into his eyes, and for the first time, Marcus saw something that might have been hope in those alien depths. "I want you to help me find a third option," the chief said. "Because if we cannot find a way for humans and the collective to coexist, this war will not end until one of us is completely destroyed. And I'm no longer certain which of us that will be."